Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
It's Everybody's Business from Bloomberg Businessweek. I'm Max Chafkin.
And I'm Stacey Vanek Smith.
Hey, Stacey.
Hey, Max. This is a special day. It's our first show. It's our first official show.
It's a holy day, Stacey. The first official episode of a new podcast from Bloomberg Businessweek where we break down the news of the week. We bring in some of the smartest journalists we know from the extended Bloomberg universe, some of the writers and reporters and editors from Bloomberg Businessweek, and sort of chew over what happened, what matters, and what's coming next.
And today's show, our first show, is all about beginnings, our brave new world, or brave new economy. Actually, things like tariffs, those are still pretty new and changing by the hour, but have not been showing up in prices.
Not yet showing up in prices. No. And we have Amanda Mull, Businessweek columnist, consumer spending expert, to talk that over, to mull that over, if you will. Stacey, you and Amanda, you went on a field trip without me.
We did.
Okay, and then the NBA playoffs are heating up, and there is a new sports owner in town, an owner that I think most fans are going to be really excited about. I'm talking, of course, about the private equity bro. They are buying up teams, valuations are going up, and we have Randall Williams, Businessweek columnist and sports reporter, coming in to talk to us all about that.
Who does not love private equity? And finally, we have our underrated story of the week. In this case, a new kind of sporting equipment that might be breaking some pretty important rules. Max, I'm going to tell you, this one gets personal for you.
I can't wait. Okay, but of course, this show is called Everybody's Business, and we take the everybody very seriously.
We do take it seriously, and we want to make sure that there is something in the show for everybody. But Max, you and I have both been covering the world of business and economics for a very long time, and it can be a little bit of a bubble. It can be hard to know like what normal people find interesting after a little while.
Are you saying that we're not normal?
Ever so slightly siloed is all I'm saying. So we wanted to see what other people who don't spend all of their time looking at this stuff want to know about.
Well, this is my favorite part of the show because we're in New York. Obviously, people from all over the world are here. And you, Stacey Vanek Smith, are like very good at going out and talking to those people in the world.
Yes, I am getting very good at going up to people and saying, have you heard the good news? You can be on a podcast. So to get the voice of the people, I went to the beating heart
of New York City,
Times Square, to ask people, what are the business and economic stories that you want to hear about?
I mean, AI for sure. Everybody wants to know more about that.
We all just graduated college, so it's like keeping up with the different economic policies that will affect us as like young investors.
Obviously, the price of eggs.
Really? You're a big egg watcher?
Yes. I work at a boutique grocery store where, like, I'm not joking, a box of a dozen eggs is like $10, $12.
Everyone's talking about tariffs. I work at a small consulting firm, and I worry about how that's going to affect like my job. You know what I mean?
I'm just glued to the gossip of the markets.
Are you a markets watcher?
In times of crisis, yes.
Would you guys listen to a new business podcast?
I would, yeah.
What about you guys?
I'm not a big podcast person, but if I were to listen to a podcast.
Thank you.
For sure.
Am I going to be on the podcast?
Yes. Is that okay?
Did you get good sound bites? Oh my God.
Yeah, I got great sound bites.
I wish I knew that. I would have sounded better.
Wow.
The people have spoken.
So we're worried about eggs. We're worried about consulting rates.
I think jobs. I think people are worried about their jobs.
Well, that's fair. We're going to do this every week. Not always questions about what should be on the podcast, but we do want to hear from you, listeners, about what you want us to talk about and what you're seeing in the economy. You should send us an email, everybody's@bloomberg.net. That's everybody's with an S at bloomberg.net. We're going to repeat that email address over and over again.
So many times.
Until you actually send us some emails. So get ready. All right, Stacey, the big kind of business news earlier this week, it was good news. It was that inflation, which everybody had been really worried about with, Trump's high tariffs and the erratic nature of the tariffs, it actually wasn't that bad. It was 2.3%. I think that was the lowest level that we've seen since 2021. That was before we had the post-pandemic spike. Trump also backed down on his China tariffs, announcing a 90-day pause. It's going down to 30% from 145%. So this is good, right? I mean, basically, those eggs that we heard about in the from that
$12
gentleman,
eggs.
they're going to cost less now, I think, and consultants will be able to flourish, and those graduates will all get jobs. Everything's great.
I mean, I have to say, I really expected to see the consumer price index, that's the inflation index, go up a lot because Trump's tariffs have been in effect for a couple months now, so we should be starting to see them. But you're right, the numbers just didn't show that. And the markets have been on this happy tear.
And we should just say, for anyone who hasn't followed this as closely as us, the reason we expected, which is everyone, the reason we expected prices to go up is because a tariff is essentially a tax on a consumer good. You know, it costs more money to bring some item, you know, an article of clothing, a toy, whatever, into the United States. And somebody has to pay for that cost, whether it's a company, and ultimately consumers are going to pay. And that's why we wanted to talk to Amanda Mull, because this is what she does. She writes about consumer behavior and retail businesses and kind of all the ways that affects culture. Amanda's here now. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
We're very excited to have you on our first episode. And you just wrote this article called Trump's Tariffs Are Going to Ruin Christmas. And it is all about tariffs and prices. So just to start out very simply, looking at the data this week, inflation numbers looking really good. Mm-hmm. What's going on? Why are the tariffs not showing up?
The most important thing to remember in trying to understand all of this is that, like, our experience of the economy as sort of like end consumers is a lagging indicator of like what is going on in the economy.
Lagging mean like it doesn't show up until after it's already happened.
Our experience will change after like months of many other things going into effect that will eventually affect us. The process of getting goods onto shelves is like a months-long and sometimes years-long process, depending on what the product is. So a lot of the stuff that's on shelves right now was imported and warehoused before any tariffs went into effect. So we still have like a lot of goods in the system that would have been tariff affected if they had been imported a little bit later, but they weren't. And then you also get this behavior from retailers and brands that are like looking at projections for what happens once some level of tariff goes into effect. And they're saying, okay, we need cash on hand. We need to move inventory now. We need to front load a lot of this consumer spending because consumers are worried and a lot of them have their wallets open right now for purchases that they might have otherwise made in 6 months or in a year or at the end of the summer. So you've got retailers going, hey, we know you're worried about tariffs. We have brought in a lot of extra inventory, and we know that you want to buy right now, so here's 15% off, or here's buy one, get one, 50% off. So you have all of these behaviors that are happening right now with this pre-tariff merchandise that is keeping prices stable and that is encouraging people to buy at a pretty steady rate. But what like Goldman analysts said in a note to clients about this CPI reading is that we're not done with this. Like probably next month and maybe in the months to come after that is where we're going to see a lot of these pricing variations start to bubble up because that's when you're going to get goods in the system that are more tariff affected. I've seen a lot of like anecdotal evidence that a lot of like customs processors and a lot of shippers don't know what they're supposed to be charging in tariffs to the end recipients. Yeah, people are very confused.
So what you're saying basically is boats move slowly. Like, yes. You know, a lot of this stuff comes on a giant container ship.
Literally and figuratively.
And those container ships take weeks to get here. And not just that, but a lot of the goods that are being brought on those container ships contain other items that also arrive on container ships. This just takes a long time. And a lot of companies like Apple, right, they just like frantically imported as much of their stuff as they could.
It was like 600 tons or something of iPhones.
Trump made this very easy for them, and maybe even deliberately, right? He put the date on the calendar, Liberation Day, so we all know, got to get as much, stuff ahead of Liberation Day. It seems like that kind of happened, right?
Absolutely. I talked to a consumer industry expert from EY who said that of the businesses that he has sort of been observing and the ones, that are in their client base, he saw retailers and brands bringing in on average about 90 days of excess inventory. And to the point where you could look around the freight industry and the logistics industry in the US and see like warehouses filling up and like warehouse space being sort of at a premium, especially near ports. Companies that had the cash on hand to bring in extra stuff really did just front load as much as they could.
So tariffs haven't really shown up yet, but they're definitely going to show up. And so, Max, I don't know if you know this, but Amanda and I live pretty close to each other in Brooklyn, and we live pretty close to a Target. which is basically Amanda's church as a consumer reporter. So she agreed to meet me there and take me on a little Target tariff tour.
We're looking at a rather large TV. It's a 65-inch Roku TV, $250. When I worked at Best Buy from like 2004 to 2008, flat panel TVs were still several $1,000s. We would put one on sale for like $1,000 and, you know, people would line up for that stuff. But they've come down in price a ton in the past like 15 years. The ultra inexpensive $250 65-inch TV that you can take home today from Target is a product, ultimately, of what a globalized manufacturing chain produces for wealthy consumers.
And what happens to our flat screen TVs in a tariffed world?
Like everything, they get a lot more expensive. This is the type of manufacturing that is really hard to reproduce in new places because it is a very delicate process. It requires a lot of specialized machinery, and you need like a ton of workers that you can pay not that much money in order to pull this off at these prices.
All right. Shall we go to produce?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. And why have you brought us here?
We're looking at pineapples. Let me see. It's a Del Monte pineapple. They are $3. For how big and heavy a pineapple is, getting this from Costa Rica, and you can buy it like fresh off the shelf for $3 is like
in Target.
Sort of a miracle.
So what is going to happen to this section of the store with tariffs?
Fresh produce supply chains rely on cold storage and cold chain and a lot of elements of global shipping that are set to become more expensive. We get a lot of our fruit from Central and South America. If you want pineapple, if you want mangoes, then tariffs are going to make a lot of those things a lot more expensive, especially out of season. Like, I don't know if they're going to be like affordable to somebody that's like trying to figure out their grocery budget.
So like these might not be in Target next year.
No, the apples probably will be. But like, I don't know if we're going to have mangoes.
I have joked to my wife many times that when we're all gone and the alien archaeologists find our civilization, the thing that they are going to be most impressed by is the produce that you can get from like the fact that you can like walk into a Whole Foods or a Target and buy an exotic fruit or a freaking ostrich egg or whatever for almost no money. It is amazing.
Like from halfway around the world.
And it would still be amazing to buy that Del Monte pineapple for $4.50 even. Like still a pineapple that made it like, you know, a huge distance. But you do wonder, like at what point does that price become too much? And does the whole system that we've kind of created around these cheap goods, like when does it start to break down? Like how much could people of the world really be willing to spend?
And fresh produce is really tough when you look at like how little small changes in price could affect availability, because the margins at every step of the fresh produce chain are like really, really thin. Even at grocery, like grocery as far as retail goes in America is known to have just like the most razor thin margins. The items themselves may not be like super heavily tariffed. A lot of it comes from Central and South America, which is less affected by the Liberation Day tariff table than China would be. But you still end up in a situation where you need a lot of logistics resources that are built out to work at scale in moving around all of these different types of goods from different places. So if you have like a big drop in imports from some places, logistics companies and freight companies and truck drivers sort of like drop out of the system. They go elsewhere. They find other types of jobs. Warehouses close, trucks, leave the road. So this is one of those second, third, fourth order effects where it's like if you change your logistics system in the country significantly, how does that affect the moving around like really fragile, really perishable goods like fresh fruit that comes in from Costa Rica or from Mexico or from Colombia or wherever? You start tinkering with little things and then the effects just reverberate out in ways that are not necessarily like super easily predictable from where we are today.
So we have some flat screen TVs that are going to get a lot more expensive, pineapples that might not be there. But we went to another part of the store. Here we go.
We're in one of the makeup aisles right now. If you look at makeup, there's lots of like fiddly little plastic parts. There's lots of packaging.
Yes. The packaging's like the best part.
Yes. Packaging is super important to selling makeup. Packaging is one of the most overseas concentrated parts of the supply chain, period. Most of it is in China and other parts of Asia. With some types of packaging, mascara, whatever else, like sometimes the tube will be made in one place and the cap to the tube will be made in another, and the brush bristles will be made in another, and that sort of all comes together to be manufactured into a saleable product. For instance, this e.l.f. mascara has a box around it so that it can hang on a shelf, and then like the goop that goes inside might come from someplace else entirely, and they're all shipped to these manufacturing facilities that then put the product together.
It's funny because I feel like what you're talking about is something I always think of when we talk about like iPhones. It's like, oh, they have components made in 44 countries, but it actually seems like maybe mascara is not different.
Yes, the things we think of as simple are rarely simple because we've basically set up the entire global economy to ensure that like they're efficient by a certain definition.
And cheap.
Right. So you find, quote unquote efficiencies that enable you to do all of this across like a massive geographic space in order to make something that is ultimately like extremely complex but much cheaper than it would be if done beginning to end in one place.
Okay, so I feel like we should probably pick one of these up for Max.
We brought you a mascara. An e.l.f. Lash Extender Mascara.
Wow.
All for you.
I just have to ask, why this product?
Just a good thing to keep in mind. There's no message, really.
We're not implying anything.
Not really.
I'll take it. I don't care.
Better lashes never hurt anybody.
No.
It is a great time to be a sports fan right now. The NBA playoffs are heating up. Baseball season is in full swing. The WNBA is about to start. Today, as this episode drops on Friday, we're going to have a Knicks playoff game and Mets against Yankees going on the same time. I am so excited about it. But there's just one thing that could make our sporting experience a little bit better, and that would be owners who knew how to squeeze efficiencies out of their franchises.
I was just thinking
and get the
that.
values a little higher.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like when sports fans watch games, what we're always looking for...
More private equity, which is why...
Absolutely.
We have Randall Williams, Bloomberg Businessweek sports columnist, friend of the podcast, here with us in the studio. Randall just wrote a column about the skyrocketing valuations for sports teams. Randall, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you all for having me. I'm excited.
You know this, but many people probably don't. The Boston Celtics were recently sold for $6.1 billion. That's a team that was worth $400 million, I believe, according to Forbes in 2011.
Whoa.
And it goes on and on. The Eagles.
What happened to them? That's a big Boston glow up.
What happened to them?
I mean, and it's not just the Celtics, right? The Eagles went from being worth $1.2 billion back then to $8.3. The Dodgers, $800 million, now $6.9 billion.
Yep.
Randall, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Like, what is causing this?
The media deals are getting bigger for each of these leagues, and the sports are growing in popularity. The stars are getting bigger. You just named 3 different teams where we could all name a superstar on them. For the Dodgers, it's Shohei Ohtani.
All might be a stretch.
You could do it. You could do it. Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley.
Okay. Yeah.
And with the Celtics, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, of course. And over time, that was Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen. So the media deals are driving these valuations up, and ultimately the cost to run these teams is also going up as well.
Yeah, what goes into a team valuation? Like, what does it mean if a team is worth $8 billion?
Well, first of all, it's a market, real estate.
Like the stadium?
Yes, for sure. The stadium. If you own your own stadium, then that gives you the ability to make a lot of revenue from things outside of your sports team. So let's use the Boston Celtics as an example. They get 41 home games a year, but 41 dates out of 365, that's not a lot of opportunity to make money. Now, granted, I think it's the Boston Bruins are also in that stadium, but the Celtics don't own their own stadium. So as part of the $6.1 billion deal, one of the things that NBA owners, NBA executives, and business people alike were watching to see is how much this team would go for, because the NBA is looking to expand. Now, for the expansion people, they're watching this because, the Celtics don't own their stadium, can't go for that much, and then it goes for $6.1 billion, which is more than the Commanders.
Who bought the Celtics? I mean, it's this guy, Bill Chisholm, co-founder of STG Partners. That's a PE firm, but then there's PE money inside of that deal.
PE, like private equity.
Sorry,
not
private
physical
equity.
Education.
Yeah, Bill Chisholm is the leading investor. He has $1 billion in Sixth Street money. He has Rob Hale. He has Bruce A. Beal Jr. So his ownership group is very diverse. He's added some more money since then, but it's a lot of money.
Sixth Street is the private equity firm?
Correct.
Oh, okay. And the private equity firm bought it. Not the guy who runs it, but the actual private equity firm.
both.
Bill Chisholm is the organizer. Now, the thing with private equity firms in sports is that they cannot be controlling owners. They are passive investors. Eventually, they'll exit, and the exits of these deals is still to be determined.
What is it in the NBA? Is it 10% or 20% is the limit for private equity?
A single private equity firm can own up to 20% of an NBA franchise. Private equity in totality can own 30%. So
Wow.
ideally you could have 20% of one firm and then 10% to another to get to 30.
This strikes me, and forgive me for saying this, but this strikes me as because you have a private equity guy who is leading the deal. These are basically private equity groups. It's just a private equity group made up of a bunch of little private equity groups.
In some ways. However, the biggest difference is that you can have your money come from private equity, but your firm cannot run the team.
Okay.
That's the difference. So you can name any private equity person in the world right now, and that individual could buy it, but the firm could not.
Because I feel like normally when private equity buys something, like for a while private equity owned KFC and stuff, I feel like they kind of tend to strip things for parts,
yes,
and
that's
it
exactly
tends to
why
not be great.
That's why sports leagues don't want private equity firms to run teams. And there's a lot of fanfare. If you jump in Reddit threads, fans hate the idea of this because they think that private equity firms are going to strip the teams down and be like, you know what? We're not paying Jalen Hurts. We're not paying Saquon Barkley. We're just going to invest in the stadium instead.
Foam fingers are going to get smaller.
They're definitely making foam fingers. It does kind of cut against what I think most people understand as fandom, right? You understand teams as being kind of community groups almost. And then you have these groups of owners, and they're buying not just one franchise, they're buying another franchise. And you might think, oh, it's like the guy who owns the baseball team in town is buying the hockey team in town or whatever. But no, the group that owns the Celtics also owns, I think, 10% of the Giants. And that doesn't fit with how a normal fan, I think, understands the point of a sports team or even the point of sports. But I'm wondering, Randall, are we seeing changes in how these ownership groups manage their teams? Are they doing the private equity playbook? Are they making the foam hands smaller?
It depends on who you are.
Yeah.
I think if you look at Josh Harris and the Washington Commanders, when he bought that team, it was a total train wreck. Now, since then, he's struck a $4 billion stadium deal. He has put more money into quite frankly, a horrible stadium. And so you have Josh Harris, who comes from private equity, investing all of this money. Now, he has the money to do this. There aren't going to be a lot of people who have the same money. But if you look at the Celtics deal, for example, Bill Chisholm has not said anything about a new stadium, even though he's not making any money from, let's say, concerts if Taylor Swift comes in town or another artist
that's
comes
how
in
you
town.
can kind of leverage your stadium
You're not
space
making
for money.
any money from those things. And so it's really dependent on how much money you have. Private equity can come in and help these stadium costs, other real estate things, other projects, liquidity, things like that.
Randall, let's dig into a little bit around what is driving these valuations. We kind of hit on the media deals.
Sure.
So just talk a little bit about what's behind that. I mean, my understanding, sports viewership is up a little bit historically, but it's relatively flat. If you look at Super Bowl viewership numbers over the last 50 years, it's gone up, but it's sort of gone up in the way that you would expect given population growth. But everything else has fallen a lot. So basically, sports has sort of maintained high viewership while sitcoms, reality shows, all that stuff has fallen out. These games, those are live. Those are unique events that if you care about it, and a lot of people care about sports, there is no way of getting around it. And that is gold for advertisers, for media.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the only thing people watch live. The reality is the NFL is a behemoth. I mean, I was shocked that the Super Bowl had 127 million people watch it when at one point the game was 40-6. At halftime, I believe it was 24-0 or something. 127 million people when the previous two games were incredible games.
But it was an underdog win, which was thrilling.
The Eagles were pretty good all throughout the season.
But
there was
still,
narratives.
But the Chiefs had
They had the three-peat going.
Yeah.
They had the three-peat going. But if you were paying attention to both teams, the Eagles were the dominant team. The Chiefs were surviving week by week. Now, the NBA has seen some fluctuation, of course. NBA Finals ratings were down. Now, current playoff viewership is at an all-time high. However, what happens when LeBron exits, Steph Curry exits, and, if the Knicks don't pull this series out, you could see a dramatic fall off, not just because they're a popular team, but you look at the markets that are out there, Oklahoma City, the Indiana Pacers, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Denver Nuggets. It's not the same thing as the New York Knicks. Even the brand recognition isn't the same. But at the same time, NBA has a $76 billion media deal that isn't up until 2036.
Does ESPN pay them to air their games?
Yes, the NBA's new media deals with ESPN, it is with Amazon and NBC. And the NFL has 6 different media partners. The MLB will be negotiating theirs pretty soon as well.
What does private equity see in sports teams? Like, why are they making this investment?
I mean, I think if you keep looking at the media deals and they keep doubling, they keep tripling, and the franchise valuations, if you look at the NBA or the NFL or the MLB, these sales keep going for higher and higher and higher. I mean, the Panthers sold for 2.2, the Denver Broncos sold for 4.6, the Washington Commanders, billions, and then the Washington Commanders sold for $6 billion. You're looking at these exits and it's like, wow, like these teams are tripling over time in a matter of a decade. You don't normally see that in business. And so what the NFL has done with their rules is if a private equity firm buys into it, you have to hold it for 6 years. They're not looking for immediate exits. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that Blue Owl was looking to exit as early as they were with the Phoenix Suns. It's just that Robert Sarver got in trouble. And so he was forced to sell the team, or he elected to sell the team.
So having done some reporting on this and kind of followed private equity in general, private equity in healthcare, for instance, the business model is basically like you cut a bunch of costs, you raise prices where you can, and then you sell often to another private equity firm. What I'm wondering is, who are the buyers? Like, if the price of the Celtics has gone up, the math is going to be hard, but
Sure.
like 1,000% or whatever over the last 15 years. How do you get that? Are they expecting another 1,000%? And if that happens, who's the buyer? Like, at what point does this start to look like a bubble rather than an asset with a lot of upside?
Well, I think that it really depends on who you ask. As I'm watching this, I think it's incredible that the Celtics got to 6-1. I've talked to plenty of NFL owners, and they all tell me like they don't think they're anywhere near the ceiling of this, and the Super Bowl is kind of a telltale sign at that, because if your biggest event is a blowout and it sets a record in viewership, you're still going to have media companies that are going to want to buy in at a new, bigger price. And this is a reminder, the NFL's media deal is over $100 billion. And yet they set a record in a blowout game. And so what's the next one going to be? $150 billion, $175 billion? We don't know. And so that's going to drive valuations up. The NBA's media deal begins this upcoming season. And so that's a $76 billion media deal. That's going to drive up values for the next 10 years as well. Now, what's going to be interesting to see is how these owners offset the cost, because stadiums aren't getting any cheaper. Contracts aren't getting any cheaper. And you're right, there are going to be some billionaires who are priced out of this, and you will see the NFL, the NBA, the MLB adjust their private equity rules so that these private equity firms can come in and provide solutions to owners who aren't capital heavy.
Randall, like, you're a sports business reporter, but I mean, I assume you can't totally divorce your fandom from your. I know we're all objective journalists, but I'm sure sometimes it slips through the cracks. I mean, how are you feeling about this? We are to our final segment, and Randall, you're going to need to stick around for this.
All right.
This is where either Stacey or I will go through the depths of the news cycle.
Deep dives.
We'll do deep dives. We'll do extensive research and find the underrated story of the week, the story that people should be paying more attention to. And Stacey, what is it this week?
So I brought this story. Randall, I don't know if you know this, but both Max and I are runners.
Okay.
And over the weekend, Max and I cumulatively ran 100 miles.
Whew.
Well, okay, I'll be truthful, which is that Max ran 100 miles and I ran no miles. He runs ultra marathons because sometimes one marathon isn't enough. How is that embarrassing? It would be the first thing I said to everybody.
Wait a minute.
If I ran 100
The marathon was 100 miles.
No, he ran an ultra marathon. 100
You're not the
miles.
first person I've met that does this.
Yeah, no, I know. It's like a middle-aged cliche.
Well,
It is not.
kind
I
of
just don't
embarrassed.
Who does that?
Let's set automobiles and vehicles aside. He hasn't heard of horses, mules, anything like that.
Where is a mule when you need
You could
one?
even get a sled.
Yeah.
You could even get a sled.
Well, so my underrated story is that the sport of ultra marathoning, very long distance running, has been plagued by scandal in the form of super puffy shoes. So apparently when you run 100 miles, and this feels reasonable, you want super poofy soles on your shoes. And we've all seen this has become a trend, right? The Hoka shoes and stuff like that getting poofier and poofier. And apparently if you run 100 miles, you want super lofty shoes. But there are now these careful regulations around how shoe sole height.
How much poof can you have?
Yes. And people are getting disqualified from races for overly poofed shoes.
Wow.
Yeah. But the shoemakers keep making them, and they don't care. They're upping the ante. There's a new shoe from Puma where the sole of the shoe is 58 millimeters, which is the size of a Rubik's Cube.
Okay, can you show me
Yes,
this?
here is the picture.
Oh my God.
This is your people.
That is obscene.
Well, apparently people love these shoes, and the poofier the sole, the more people will pay. And because shoe sales have been declining for the past 2 years, they're down by 2% running shoes. Shoes, like shoemakers, are getting more and more invested in shoes that they can charge a premium for. And apparently people will just pay endless amounts of money. So actual money being made from shoes up 14% in spite of the sales drop because of poofy soles. And
they're basically heels for men.
Heels for men.
First of all, there is no. This is not an ultra running story. There is no fashion. I mean, can
you confirm or deny that these are heels for men?
They are heels for men, but I'm just saying that these are two worlds that that could not be further from one another. No one who is actually running 100 miles looks their best, to say the least. I also think it's funny how in shoes you have all of this amazing innovation. You know, earlier it was the carbon fiber soles, and there are always these like crazy innovations and all this conversation around performance and is it cheating or whatever. And then you have fashion, which is like totally on the opposite end of innovation. And like those two forces are sometimes pushing against each other, sometimes pushing with each other. I don't know what's
or just pushing you forward in a race.
What's weird, when I started running long distances, the big thing was having no sole, was having like these
barefoot running,
the five fingers,
Vibrams.
The fly knit shoes.
Yeah, or wearing those like shoes with the toes where your toes stick out.
Oh, God.
And even today, like you see people with giant soles. I saw a guy this past weekend running in sort of like what you think of as like a Roman thong, like sandals.
Really?
Like he's going to spear somebody.
Story. I think he's trying to get away from the story.
Well, here's the thing. Like, if you're running 100 miles, like, is it cheating if you have like a slightly more comfortable shoe? Like, if I ran, I don't even think using like a moped is cheating if it's 100 miles. Like,
we got to ask him. If you saw someone who was speeding past you and they had some bigger soles, are you going to point them out and flag down an official?
Yeah, if they run
turn
by
them
in
to the race director immediately.
Oh, Lord.
No, I don't think I would notice.
People have been turning each other in, apparently, too. There was this guy who
I want to know who's running
disqualified.
around with a ruler.
This show is produced by Stacey Wong. Magnus Henriksen is our supervising producer. Amy Keene is our editor. And Brendan Francis Newnham is our executive producer. Special thanks to Jeff Muskus and Maria Ling. And Sage Bauman heads Bloomberg Podcasts. If you have a minute, please rate and review the show. It helps people find us, and it would really mean a lot to us. And if you have a story that should be our business, email us at everybodies@bloomberg.net. That is everybody's with an S at bloomberg.net. And thank you for listening. See you next week.